Everyone, welcome back to session number 8 around scale and optimization for your cold email campaigns. Let's dive in. We got a pretty exciting lesson for you. So, in this session, what we want to do is talk about very briefly what an optimization framework looks like and what an experimentation framework looks like. This will help you understand on how to interpret the data you're receiving on some of your campaigns. And lastly, we want to identify the right parameters you want to scale your initial outreach efforts. All right. So let's dive in. Let's first talk about campaign optimization, which is a big question I get asked quite a bit. So I found that this diagram tends to work the best, which will help you understand when you need to change a very specific parameter, right? So let's break it down. Let's talk about first thing about open rates. Open rates is all about, um, there's a little bit about subject line, about personalization or around your preview text. So we talked about this earlier. You know, at a very high level, if your open rates are good, that means it's indicative that your subject line and preview text is good, right? The next parameter you want to go is check your click-through rate. And your click-through rate, generally on cold emails, are going to be fairly low just by nature. Like think about the last time you clicked on something within a cold email, right? But if your click rates are high, that's indicative that okay, that your message is somewhat resonating and the person is somewhat interested in what you're having to say, so they're willing to click on this random link, right? But if your click rates are very, very low, then it just tends that you need to work on some of your email messaging, right? If your click rates are high, your open rates are high, but your response rate is low, right? That means your call to action needs to be adjusted, right? Um, because that clearly means they don't know what to do and they're not responding back with any sorts of interest or direction of where they want to take this conversation, right? So this is a great framework I like to give a lot of individuals to figure out what's the best way of going about campaign optimization. Just some statistics for you. Generally, you want to keep an open rate between north of 40%. You want to aim to get about 60%, right? Ideally, if you get something close to the 90s, that's great, but you'll end up seeing that with lower volume campaigns. Like, so let's say you're sending out a cold email campaign to only 50 people or 100 people. That's when you tend to see things that are a lot higher, right? Click-through rates, are usually low. Like I said, you're about less than 1%. If you get anything closer to like 4 or 5%, that's usually a good metric, quote unquote. Response rates, again, typical response rate, whether they're interested or not interested, of 2%. You want to aim for about a 5% response rate with an interested rate of more than 2%, right? If you're operating within that space, that means it's successful, right? And just to be clear, rates are calculated by the number of responses divided by opens, right? Because I know some platforms define it differently and stuff. So just so we're all on the same page. Okay, again, great framework that you can utilize right off the bat to optimize some of your campaigns. One of the other things I get quite asked a lot is like, hey, my open rates are really bad, my cold email campaigns. And I'm like, okay, fine, what's the best way to diagnose it, right? So this is another great little framework I came up with. It, and I think it's a great to kind of, you'll get better at it as you go, but this is a good starting point, right? So these are all the variables that are, if you really think about it, that's impacting your open rate, right? You have the burner domain in the email, so that's more of a technical aspect. You have the actual prospect list. Is it well researched and is it cleaned, right? Which we talked about in the earlier lessons. It's the copy, so that's including preview text and call to action, and the cold email platform itself, right? So what we have here is kind of like a matrix where, okay, I want to go and identify which one of these variables are causing problems or causing issues, or which of these is the exact issue. So what you want to be doing here is like, okay, let me test each of these in a controlled environment, meaning let me keep everything else the same, but let me then change one thing, right? So this is kind of like a checklist, and I've kind of prioritized this by uh, stuff that's easy to do versus stuff that's the hardest. So you want to first start off by like, okay, fine, if my open rates are doing fairly poorly, let me go check out with another email. Instead of emailing from ahan at growthrhino.co, let me try emailing from ahan at growthrhino.io, assuming both domains are fairly warmed up, and identify, okay, is there a difference, right? I'm going to use the same list, same copy, same cold email platform. Moving on, okay, We've identified that's not the issue. Let's go on to the prospect list. Okay, is the list well researched? Okay, great. Am I using the right cleaning tools? Am I only sending to valid emails only? Okay, once you've identified that's good, then you go into copy and you look at two things. You look at preview text and you look at call to action, and you're trying to understand whether or not this resonates with your audience, right? If the preview text and subject line is still generating the same amount of open rates and stuff, you're like, okay, fine. It's hard to tell. The last thing you want to do is then change cold email platforms completely. I've seen this happen where we've switched from one platform to another and then the open rates bounce back up, right? So I find using this type of structure will help you isolate the incident. So this is something you can do over maybe a week or so, where you launch like, let me take one list and break it up into like maybe 4 chunks and test out all of these things. And then, by the end of the week, using, I guess, some qualitative metrics, you'll understand, okay, fine, what's going on here, right? So this is something you can use again right off the bat and will really help you understand what's going on. And as you start to scale up your campaigns, this is definitely going to be an issue because you're going to have some domains that are going to be fried, some emails are not going to be working, some of the lists that you develop are not going to be the best. So there's going to be a lot of different variables. So it's good to kind of do a spot check or health check on this maybe once or twice a month. Okay, we talked a lot about in this course about experimentation. So let's give it a little bit more context, right? So like I said, you always want to be experimenting with the persona, copy, messaging, and value propositions, because that will help you identify, okay, what is that winning messaging or what's that winning value proposition, or who's the right persona, depending on what stage you are, obviously. So I thought of like, hey, what's the most simplest framework to get things started? And again, as you do more and more of this stuff, you'll get better at it. But this is what I've come up with. I'm a big fan of, as you guys can see, like very basics tables, right? But this is kind of the parameters of an experiment, and like we can briefly go over it. But like you want to have, okay, what's the background info? Like, well, what am I trying to do here? What's a hypothesis I'm testing? What am I actually measuring? What the success look like? Who the respective persona is? What problem are you solving for them? And which CTAs am I using? If you have a copy workbook or a separate document, be like, hey, I'm going to be using this copy, right? Then you're going to say, okay, how many steps am I going to have my sequence? What are the summary of the results and what are the insights, right? The reason you want to get good at doing this is because later on, especially if you have employees leaving or if you're trying to document your learnings from an experimentation, this is a great way of putting everything down, right? So I would highly encourage it. And this is kind of what it looks like when you filled it out. So we did it for, us, right? Like, okay, fine. We want to run outbound campaigns to B2B SaaS companies. And essentially what we're testing out is the difference between the USA market or Western European market, right? Again, we're looking only at company sizes between 1 to 10, right? Our hypothesis is that seed companies in the US will have a better response to cold emails, to book meetings, because there's less issues to deal with things like privacy laws, and obviously it's English speaking, right? What are we going to measure? We're going to measure interested responses. And what the success look like is like, hey, if we get more than a 3% interested response rate, that means, okay, fine, hypothesis is valid, right? Who's a persona? Founders for B2B SaaS companies between 1 to 10. And we're going to have one list for the US and another one for Western Europe, okay? What problem are we solving? Hey, we're going to help them book meetings with their ideal prospects because they're not able to because they don't have the relevant resources. All right, CTAs testing, we're going to look at interest in learning more, or hey, can I send you a resource to learn more about cold email? So remember what we talked about different CTAs and about frictionless CTAs and how you can leverage things like assets. I'm going to use the copy from 001A. There's going to be 3 value props with the respective follow-up. So that's about 6 steps, right? Okay, let's say we ran the campaigns, and this is a great place to actually put your results here. So this is helpful when you have other people getting onboarded and just for you to document your thoughts. But at a very high level, be like, okay, fine. We had a good open rate for North America with a high CTR, but not as much for Western Europe. And then we had a lot of unsubscribes as well. So what does that tell us? Okay, you can add some more stuff in here. And one of the insights is like, hey, it's better that we stick with the US demographic because they understand this channel more and they're more receptive to hiring an agency, right? I quickly put this together, but you can understand that this framework has a little bit of structure to logically think about your campaigns. So you want to be launching multiple experiments. So you want to have multiple of these kind of set up in a Google sheet. The reason this is super helpful is because this will allow you to take very different approaches to some of your campaigns, right? And then you can brainstorm and you can experiment and you can think of all these different things that you'd like to do, right? And as you're logically putting this all together, you can be like, okay, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. Because again, we're taking a qualitative approach to things. We're unless we have enough data, then we're taking quantitative, right? So I really like doing this, and it helps me personally organize my thoughts, right? Again, something you can use straight away. Okay, so one of the things I get asked also is when is the right time to scale your cold email campaigns? And that's a really tough question because it's dependent on multiple variables. So let's dive in. What I define as the right parameters or variables is these four things, right? When you've clearly identified with data that this is your audience or persona and you validated it, meaning that like, hey, I'm able to book meetings with this individual, or I'm able to get a really good response rate and interest rate from this individual that meet these specific criteria. Okay. Um, Plus, on top of that, you really, really figured out messaging, meaning like you know how to communicate to this audience on specific problems. Okay. You're not going in and just saying, hey, we help you do ABC, but really going in and you understand their pain points and you're able to offer a genuine solution that they actually care about, right? And this is going to change per individual, but you again want to attach some sort of data point to it. Okay. And the third parameter, which I think a lot of people don't think enough about, is what we talked about in the earlier of the course, is like, how do I take somebody from problem unaware to aware to interested in your solution slash offer, right? If you've identified that process, then you're starting to be like, okay, I understand it, because you don't want to be in a position where you're like, okay, I'm just going to mass cold email people and I'm just going to hope for the best. What you want to do is be like, hey, I'm mass cold emailing these people because they're in this part of the buyer journey. Because a cold email for someone who's problem aware versus problem unaware, very different, right? So you want to have that idea at least in place, right? The last, which we'll talk a little bit more in the next section as well, is the necessary cadence to book meetings, meaning what's your overall process? You know, are you just sending cold emails? Are you jumping on the phone with them? Are you doing, do you need to do a cold email, 3 meetings to get an opportunity? Like, what does that actual process look like? Because often what we end up finding is that people are going to send a lot of cold emails, they get a bunch of interested responses, then they don't follow up, or they have a bunch of people coming through the door and they don't know what to do, right? So you really want to make sure that you understand what happens next and how you're able to ensure that you keep a consistent um, process going. Okay, I would really recommend that you start thinking about that. This is taken from HubSpot, and we talked a little bit about this, but there's this whole notion of like buyer journey, and what you want to be doing at this level is to understand the end-to-end buyer journey. What this means is, and we talked about this with 5 shorts of marketing and for 5 shorts stages, is that you want to consider what does awareness to decision making look like. But I really like this diagram from HubSpot because they're like, hey, if I take someone from visitor, how do I take them all the way down to customer, right? You're not going to have all the answers, but you definitely want to start making some assumptions and seeing, okay, fine, does this make sense? If I get somebody from a cold email response, which is a top funnel activity, and and they say that they're interested, that's an MQL. Okay, marketing qualified lead. How do I take them from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead? What type of questions do I need to ask? Right? What type of answers do they need to give me for them to say, okay, fine, this is qualified to go into a genuine opportunity? And then as an opportunity, what do I need to do to make sure I can close them, right? This is covered in some other literature online. I'm happy to chat about this some more if anybody wants to reach out. But it's something I would encourage you all to think about. And HubSpot's a great resource to someone that getting started. Okay. Another thing you need to consider when you're starting to scale is do the math to build a plan. And what that means is, specifically from a cold email perspective, is like understand what the tools are required for you to scale. Do I need 10 boxes? Do I need 20 inboxes? Do I need a copywriter? Do I need 5 templates, 2 templates? How am I going to build my list? How am I going to build my list at scale? So all these different elements. And then what I mean by do the math is this is more of a sales or marketing operations type of task, but it's all arithmetic, right? Um, for instance, say like, okay, if I have 10 inboxes and I know I'm going to only send 200 cents per day, 5 days a week, I can send out 10,000 emails. And assuming I have a 40% open rate with a 2% interest rate on the opens, that should give me 80 interested responses, conversations. Let's say I have a 50% conversion rate, right? That means I get 40 meetings, and let's say my conversion rate from that is a few percentage points, and I'm able to generate 10 opportunities. Um, that tells me, okay, fine, I'm able to predictably or hopefully get 10 opportunities week over week or month over month. Okay, again, this is just an example. But specifically is you need to understand who is going to maintain this engine. Is this on you? Do you need to get an intern? Do you need to get somebody else? You need a BDR, right? How many people are also needed to handle some of these meetings, and who's going to be doing the follow-ups post the meetings, right? I think again, a lot of people they'll jump into this and they don't understand all these parameters. Again, this is a simple calculation, and then you're like, okay, if I'm able to push out this amount, I'm able to get uh, uh, these many opportunities or meetings out of it, right? Maybe you don't want to send out 10,000 emails a week. Maybe you want to send out 500. But if you're only going to be sending out 500, you better make sure that your conversion rates beyond that are going to be good, right? And how do you optimize for that? Just by doing some of this math, okay, very, very basic math. And you can have this on a Google Sheet with basic formulas and keep manipulating this data to say, okay, fine, this is what's optimal for me based on my current situation. I can't afford to have a VA or an intern, so I need to do this myself. So realistically, I can send out X amount of emails and all of that type of stuff. But highly, highly recommend you do some of this. The last thing that we'll talk about this in the next lesson, which is called playbooks, is again, we need to identify the most effective cadence, meaning what happens before and after the cold emails are done, right? So again, something we'll talk about in the next lesson, which I'm really looking forward to. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next session. Hopefully you found this one valuable.